Welcome back to The Talking Hedge. I'm Josh Kincaid, and this is your Cannabis Business Podcast. Today is your Cannabis Equity Deal Watch update. On the line with us is Dan Kimmis, our CBD correspondent with Good CBD Products.
Oh, I'm excited about the equity update, Cron. There's so much going on.
There's a lot going on. Today, we're going to start off with Arcview. Arcview is a private equity company that pulls together money. Started with Steve D'Angelo down in California with Harborside, a huge cannabis rec store. They actually went public recently. And then Troy also started Arcview and is in charge of the MJ Business Daily and MJ BizCon. And maybe both of them are a little bit too busy. And so they had recently had a Series A round for $7.7 million. And that Series A was basically just to take over the main investors. So that came primarily from Trivergence and Cresco Capital Partners. Trivergence is a New Jersey-based private equity group that's raised $1.5 billion in institutional equity capital over the last 13 years. But Arcview is its first move into cannabis. And so the main idea behind this is just to get the founders out of the way. The money came from a total of 600 accredited investors, including the CEO of Dixie Brands or Dixie Elixir. And I believe that they probably have an idea of trying to make this group a little bit more relevant as you kind of see other competitors like Privateer coming in, backed by Peter Thiel, who's put all of his money behind that to try and make that more relevant. And yet we're also seeing that in Congress this week, they're going to be speaking about the States Act to allow banking into mainstream. And so in the eventuality that that happens, groups like Arcview will become less important, less relevant. And maybe that's why it only commanded a $7.7 million Series A. Relative to, let's say, the Jushi company, Jushi is a Florida-based marijuana company that closed an agreement to acquire the Pennsylvania-based Franklin Bioscience for $63 million. So that's for 12 medical marijuana dispensaries in Pennsylvania. It's a combination of cash, debt, and stock. But just to kind of put that into perspective, I mean, $63 million for Pennsylvania, that's not recreational legal yet, is a lot of money to throw around relative to only $7.7 million for one of the first, equity-based investment companies. They probably have a lot of information behind there, a lot of data, and yet didn't really get a lot of capital behind them. But I think what Arcview wants to do is look at international opportunities in Colombia that's looking to legalize adult use. And so with the international opportunities that Canada paved the way for, we're seeing Colombia opening up, as well as cannabis exchange traded funds. And so looking at some of the holdings over the last week with the Horizon Marijuana Life Index ETF that gained 2% last week, the Alternative Harvest ETF rose just 1%. And that's relative to some other companies that'll move about 30% of the total S&P. So for example, the Standard & Poor's 500 will move 15% in a year. And yet some of these cannabis companies are doing a third of that in just one day. So to put that into perspective, the India Globalization Company increased its shares almost 7% in a week. And like I said, the S&P will do 15% in a year on average. Looking at the New Age Beverage Company that gained its shares 3% for the week. Tilray was flat, which is interesting. And some of the losers this last week, looking at some declines in the industry overall, it looks like MedMen continued to have its shares tumble 4%, closing at $2 a share. Organogram Holdings fell 1.5%. And CBDMD shares tumbled 5%.
Well, Cron, here's the thing. I find myself a little bit of a bull in this market, right? I think it's going to just do some crazy things. And what's funny about it is when you look at some of these companies, and like you say, the fluctuations, right? The nature of the growth opportunity that's sitting out there on the street, it is a sprint.
The hemp industry has definitely been adding to the frothiness as Canadian companies have been accumulating their capital, coming back into the U.S. and buying up property, plant, and equipment. That's 280 compliant so that they can write off all of those taxes. And so we're seeing the Amish even coming in and introducing a bill trying to prevent the feds from interfering in legal cannabis. So I'm assuming that's from, around the Pennsylvania area. I've had calls about automated joint rolling machines for hemp cigarettes, pre-rolls, blunt rolling machines. Pennsylvania is no joke, and the Amish definitely want a piece of the cannabis pie. And all of it really just kind of boils down to money. We're seeing former Albertsons CEO increase his MedMen tech investment to $21 million, which is a lot of money. You're seeing Neptune Wellness having a $41 million private placement to help with financing merger and acquisition deals. Private placement is essentially just selling stock, not to the public, but to a private accredited investor, some rich person. And then, we mentioned that Toker received $1 million investment from Meridian Capital last week. Curaleaf bought Grassroots for $875 million. Tilt Holdings reported $125 million convertible note financing. So I'm throwing around a lot of numbers. It's a lot of money. The industry's going crazy. And just in time for the presidential election, as this headline from Benzinga says that the public opinion has changed so dramatically that cannabis is shaping the 2020 presidential election. And I just want to make a point that this is really all about money. The economy right now, the GDP is about 2%. And so it's always historically been at least 3 on the low end. You look at China, they had crazy GDP at 13 and 16%. 6 is slow for them. And we don't make anything. All right. So finally, we're actually producing things that might have the potential to be global commodities for sale. And obviously, with the election, it's going to be a huge topic. And so cannabis has changed the landscape.
So as a field researcher, I go in the field. One thing that was really interesting from the field research this weekend, the public is starting to become, quote, hemp aware. And then I had several people tell me, no, you're talking about cannabis, I'm talking about hemp, et cetera, right? Where they're actually getting a sense of distinguishing. And then again, the buzz on the street is things like hempcrete, things like challenging deforestation and soil and ecology management around hemp, right? And these kinds of things. Really interesting to go out and actually poll the general public, because that's such an echo from all the noise, right?
Yes, and there's a lot of people that are looking at recreational cannabis for therapeutic purposes, wanting to reduce pain or stress or anxiety. And so there's a lot of people that want this plant for multiple uses, and it's not just to get high. And so taking a look at the cannabis stock trends, we're starting to see a lot of those companies scale up and expand. And they're coming back into the U.S. to consolidate and buy companies. So we're going to continue to see that trend as companies are being bought, aggregated, consolidated, and companies have to band together as capitulation becomes that next strategy and normalization occurs. Looking at another graph between Kale and Chronic and comparing the two, Kale is a $345 million market, whereas cannabis is a $1.4 billion market. And the average price for kale per pound is $2 compared to $250 for cannabis. So as a commodity, it obviously makes sense to kind of switch, and you hear farmers doing that all the time. In the mainstream news, we're hearing about farmers losing their land, and it's really a crunch for them right now as the economy is shifting. And so all of these things are going to be big topics as the election becomes more of a mainstream focus next year for the elections in the fall of 2020. Cannabis becomes more of a commodity. We will only have 11 states that's legal, Illinois being the most recent one. And so as the presidential election continues and the constituents want more money for their regions, it's going to become more of a topic. Money makes the world go round. Cannabis is worth a lot of money. I think it's going to become more of a mainstream issue, and this presidential election topic is, I think, the key focal point there.
Oh, you can expect a lot of promises are going to be made by a lot of different folks, right? On the ground, where it's, quote, legal, The infrastructure is coming in hard and fast because there is a lot of money to be made. I think, I believe in CBD. I hope those words don't come back to haunt me, right? But at the same time, obviously I'm not alone, right? It is going off.
And with that, we're going to roll this one up. I'm Josh Kincaid. This is The Talking Hedge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or don't, and I'm out.